Hello everyone, tonight I want to tell you a story about what grief can hide, and what power sounds like when it speaks softly. It begins in a law office so quiet that even paper seems rude. By the time Nina Alvarez understood what she was hearing, the damage had already been arranged. The afternoon outside was gray enough to flatten every color. Inside, the conference room smelled faintly of old carpet, toner, and stale coffee. A wall clock ticked with a dry, patient sound. The attorney, Mr. Bell, adjusted his glasses and turned a page as if this were routine. Across from him, Thaddeus York sat in a navy dress suit with her hands folded neatly over a leather handbag, composed to the point of serenity. Nina still had her father's funeral program in her coat pocket. Mr. Bell cleared his throat. Under the terms of the revised will, the residence transfers in full to Mrs. Thaddeus York. Remaining liquid assets are to be distributed at the executor's discretion for household obligations, medical debt, and memorial costs. To Nina Alvarez, a personal bequest of $5,000. For a second, Nina thought she had missed a sentence. Her father's house. The one with the cracked blue tiles he kept promising to replace. The one he told her, more than once, would always be hers. "I'm sorry," she said, too quickly. "No. That's not right." Mr. Bell looked down again, not at her. "This document is dated 6 days before your father's death. It appears properly witnessed and notarized. 6 days." Nina stared at the date until the numbers blurred. 6 days before he died, he was struggling to stay awake through a pain medication schedule. 6 days before he died, she had been told he needed rest. 6 days before he died, Thaddeus had decided who got to enter the bedroom. Thaddeus exhaled slowly, like she had expected a scene and was disappointed by how little one cost. "Your father wanted peace at the end," she said. "He was very hurt by how distant you had become. That landed late, then all at once." Nina gave a short, disbelieving laugh that sounded ugly in the still room. "Distant? I was kept away." No one answered her. Only the clock did. Tick. Tick. And as the will lay open between them, Nina felt dread move in beside her grief, cold and deliberate, pointing back toward her father's final week. Dread did not arrive all at once. It came back to Nina in hospital light, in scraps. Evening after evening, the same stale air met her at the oncology floor. The vent hissed overhead. Monitors answered from behind half-closed doors. And every time she tried to reach her father, Thaddeus York seemed to be there first. The first night of that final week, Nina came straight from work, still wearing her badge. She found Thaddeus standing in the doorway to his room with one hand on the frame, as if she belonged there more than family did. "He just fell asleep," Thaddeus said softly. Too softly. "You know how worked up he gets when you come in upset." Nina had stared past her and seen her father's eyes open. Not fully. Just enough to show he was awake. "Dad?" Thaddeus turned her body just enough to block the line between them. "Please. If you cared about him, you would stop making this about yourself and let him rest." That sentence had burned slowly. Nina remembered walking away angry at the wording, not the warning. Later, she hated herself for that. The second time, a nurse was adjusting blankets while her father tried to lift his hand. Nina stepped to the bedside, and his fingers caught weakly at her sleeve. His skin felt papery. Cold at the knuckles. "Nina," he said, or tried to. One word. Maybe only the start of one. Then Thaddeus was at the other side of the bed with a cup of ice chips and a patient smile. "Don't tire him out," she said to Nina, though she spoke as if the nurse were witness. "You disappear for months, and suddenly you're here every night. Funny timing." Nina let go of his hand too fast. Defensive before she was hurt. I was here before. You kept changing the hours. Thaddeus gave a sad little shrug. You only started pushing once money was involved. The words had sounded absurd then. Cruel. Now they sounded prepared. On the last evening Nina saw him alive, the room was dim except for the green blink of a monitor. Her father smelled faintly of antiseptic and the cedar soap he always used. His mouth moved when she leaned close. She heard breath, effort, and one broken syllable. Box, she thought he said. Or stop. She still did not know. Then the door clicked open. Thaddeus entered with a doctor and folded her arms as if Nina had been caught trespassing. Enough, she said. He needs calm. Not guilt. Nina had backed away that night because her father looked exhausted, because the doctor said he needed quiet, because grief makes cowards out of people who think there will be one more chance. Now, sitting with the rewritten will still burning in her mind, Nina replayed those evenings and felt suspicion harden into shape. It was not only that she had been kept out. It was that every interruption had sounded practiced. Every delay had benefited one person. And before she could stop herself, before she could think how it would sound, she heard her own voice rising to say exactly that. It came out too fast to take back. Nina heard her own voice slice across the dining room before anyone else moved. She said Thaddeus had isolated her father, pushed him, frightened him, and gotten a dying man to sign whatever was set in front of him. The room answered first with silence. Then a chair leg dragged against hardwood. Someone cleared his throat. The lawyer, Mr. Bell, lowered his reading glasses and folded both hands over the file as if he were closing a lid. Ms. Alvarez, he said, careful and dry, I understand this is emotional. That tone made her blood rise. Emotional. As if grief had turned her childish. As if she had imagined the blocked calls, the cancelled visits, the way Thaddeus always seemed to appear at the bedroom door before her father could answer for himself. No, Nina said. You don't understand. She kept me away. Every time I came over, there was a reason I couldn't stay. He was tired. He was medicated. He was resting. Then somehow 6 days before he died, he was clear enough to redo everything? Thaddeus did not flinch. She sat with her ankles crossed and one hand on a water glass. Her expression was wounded but composed, which made Nina sound louder by comparison. I protected a sick man, Thaddeus said softly. That is what you're calling control. You kept saying I only cared once money was involved, Nina snapped. You said that to everyone. You made sure they heard it before this meeting ever happened. Her cousin Mateo looked down at the table. Aunt Celia pressed her lips together and studied the napkin in her lap. No one rushed in for Nina. That was the worst part. Not outrage. Retreat. Mr. Bell opened the folder again. There was a faint pen tap against the paper. The document was witnessed. It was notarized. Your father initialed each page. He paused. The paperwork appears valid. The words landed like a slap. Nina stared at the signature page until the ink blurred. For one hot second she almost doubted herself. Maybe she had missed something. Maybe fear had made her build a conspiracy out of doors closing and voices dropping. Then she looked at Thaddeus. Calm. Ready. Nearly pitying. That steadied her anger and ruined her judgment. You coached him, Nina said. Or you got him when he was too weak to argue. You knew exactly what you were doing. Mr. Bell's face hardened. If you are alleging coercion, you need evidence, not suspicion. The word suspicion stung because it sounded thin. Juvenile. Nina opened her mouth and found nothing strong enough to survive the room. Thaddeus exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh. This is what grief looks like when it wants a house. Aunt Celia finally spoke, but only to say, Nina, not here. Not here. Not now. Not like this. Every version of silence handed back to her. When the meeting broke apart, Mr. Bell slid a small envelope across the table. These were among your father's personal effects intended for you. Inside was a ring of old keys, cold and heavy in her palm. House keys, she thought bitterly, to doors she was already being shut out of. She closed her fist around them and walked out with her face burning, while behind her chair scraped back and low voices began choosing Thaddeus's side. By the time Nina reached the house, dusk had gone the color of a bruise. Rain ticked off the porch roof in thin, needling lines. Her father's hydrangeas sagged under the weather, blown half flat against the walk. A locksmith's van sat at the curb with its back doors open. New brass hardware gleamed on a towel. Nina stopped at the gate and felt her stomach turn cold before her mind caught up. Thaddeus stood on the porch in a camel coat, dry under the awning, one hand wrapped around a mug as if this were an ordinary errand. Two neighbors lingered under umbrellas across the hedge. They were not pretending not to watch. What is this? Nina asked. The locksmith glanced at Thaddeus first. That was answer enough. Thaddeus took a slow sip, then looked down at Nina with practiced fatigue. You're late. I told them to change everything before dark. Before I could get my father's things? Nina climbed the steps, rain slick on the wood. My clothes are still inside. His watch is inside. His records, his letters. Your father's effects have been inventoried, Thaddeus said. What was meant for you has already been provided. The little envelope. The ring of old keys. Nina's face went hot. You don't get to decide that, she snapped. You kept me away while he was dying, and now you're trying to erase me from my own house. One neighbor shifted. The porch creaked. The locksmith lowered his eyes and kept tightening a screw. Thaddeus gave a small, wounded laugh, exactly loud enough to carry. There it is. Money. Property. I said from the beginning this would happen once money was involved. Nina hated that her next words came out ragged. That is not why I'm here. Then why arrive with keys in your hand? Thaddeus asked. It was stupid, but Nina did it anyway. She lifted the ring as proof of something she could not name, chose the house key by feel, and shoved it into the front lock. It met metal and stopped. The new lock gave her nothing. She tried again. Harder. Key rattle. Lock clack. The wrongness of that sound hit deeper than the reading of the will. This was the door her father used to leave cracked when he knew she was coming by. This was the brass plate she had polished for him one Christmas because his hands were too stiff. Now her key scraped uselessly while strangers watched. Nina, Thaddeus said, calm and clear, this is my home now. For a second she could not move. Then the humiliation arrived all at once, hot and choking. You used him, she said. You used his last week and turned it into paperwork. Please leave, Thaddeus replied. You're upsetting the neighborhood. Something brittle rose in Nina's throat. She wanted to scream. Instead she yanked the keys free so hard the ring bit into her palm. One small key spun loose against the others, and a tiny bank tag flashed silver in the porch light before disappearing back into the cluster. She almost missed it. The locksmith stepped aside to let her pass. Not kindly. Just carefully. Nina went down the steps into the rain without another word. At the sidewalk, she opened her hand. Old keys, cold and heavy. House keys, maybe. Maybe not. The bank sat between a pharmacy and a shuttered travel agency, its windows pale with cold morning light. Nina stood outside for a full minute before going in. The tiny metal tag on the key ring had one branch number stamped into it, half worn away. She had read it 3 times on the bus and still expected someone to tell her she was being ridiculous. Inside, everything was fluorescent and too clean. A teller with a winter-cracked smile asked how she could help. Nina set the small key on the counter and heard herself say, "Too fast, I think my father had a box here. He died last week. I just found this among his things." The teller's face changed at once. Softer. Professional. She brought over a manager, a woman in a navy jacket who asked for identification, a death certificate, and any paperwork naming Nina as next of kin or personal representative. Nina had only some of it. For 10 awful minutes she thought the trip would end there. Then the manager studied the account file on her screen and said, "Your father listed you as a Cola C on the box 8 years ago. It remained active. We can escort you back." Nina blinked. "He did?" "Yes, ma'am." Something hot and defensive rose in her chest. For days she had been told she arrived too late. For days she had almost believed it. The vault corridor smelled faintly of metal and dust. Her boots clicked on tile. The manager inserted one key. Nina inserted the small tagged key with fingers that would not stay steady. The lock turned. A latch released with a clean, final sound. The narrow box slid out farther than she expected, heavier too, and for 1 second she thought it might hold nothing at all. Then she saw an orderly stack of documents bound with a faded green ribbon. An envelope rested on top. Her name was written across it in her father's hand. Nina sat down hard in the chair at the little viewing table. The manager stepped back and closed the privacy door. For a moment Nina only stared. Then she opened the envelope. "Nina, if you are reading this, I ran out of time or privacy." Her breath caught. She kept going. "I signed a new will under pressure. It does not reflect my wishes. The first will in this box is the one I intended to stand. I was not left alone enough to correct what was done in my final week. If anyone questions that, let them question why I needed to hide this from my own house." Her vision blurred. She wiped at it angrily and made herself unfold the will beneath the letter. It was older by 3 years. Properly witnessed. Properly signed. It left the house to Nina. It divided the rest of the estate with clear gifts and plain language. And in one attached statement, her father noted concerns about coercion if any later document appeared after a sudden change in access to him. Nina read that page twice. Then a third time. She laughed once, a broken little sound that turned into a sob before she could stop it. She pressed her fist to her mouth and bent over the table. He had known. He had seen it happening. He had tried to leave a trail. When she finally lifted her head, her cheeks were wet and cold. She folded the letter carefully, like something living. Then she took out her phone and photographed every page. Her hands still shook, but now the shaking had direction. If Thaddeus wanted another meeting, Nina would bring one. And this time, she would not walk in empty-handed. The lawyer's conference room felt colder than Nina remembered. The air conditioner hummed above them. A legal pad sat square to the table. Thaddeus York was already seated, elegant in dove gray, one hand folded over the other as if she had been inconvenienced by weather, not by evidence. Nina did not sit right away. She set her father's letter on the table first. Then the copy of the original will. Then the bank record from the safety deposit box. Last, she slid over the hospital visitor logs in a neat stack. The sound of paper against polished wood was soft, almost polite. This time, she thought, no lunging. No pleading. Just dates. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Alvarez, you said this meeting could not wait." "It couldn't." Nina took her seat. Her pulse beat hard in her throat, but her voice held. "The will you read last week was signed 6 days before my father died. This one was signed 8 months earlier and stored in his safety deposit box. She touched the top page. It leaves the house to me. And he attached a letter saying he was under pressure. Thaddeus let out a small breath that sounded almost amused. A letter anyone could have tucked in there. Grief is making you theatrical. Nina kept her eyes on the lawyer. Read the dates. Then read the visitor log from St. Catherine's. She pushed the final page closer. Paper shuffled. The room went still except for the vent overhead. The lawyer's brow tightened. There is an entry here for a mobile notary. He looked up. The afternoon before execution of the later will. Yes, Nina said. He scanned lower. Visitor listed with the notary was Thaddeus York. No other family present. There it was. Thaddeus's chin lifted. For a moment she said nothing. Nina watched the delay land. Watched calculation move behind her eyes. Then Thaddeus laughed, too quickly. Of course I was there. Someone had to help him. He was weak. He asked me to arrange things because Nina had disappeared until money mattered. The old line hit its mark anyway. Nina felt the sting in her chest, hot and childish. For one ugly second she wanted to shout. Instead she opened the letter and turned it so the lawyer could see her father's slanted signature. He wrote this before he died, she said. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. He says he was being pushed when he was medicated. He says if anything changed at the end, I should question who was in the room. A breath caught across the table. The lawyer read in silence. When he finished, he did not hand it back. He set both palms on the papers and looked at Thaddeus with a care that was colder than anger. Mrs. York, he said, I think we need to discuss whether the later instrument can stand at all. The lawyer kept both hands on the papers for another moment, as if feeling their weight. The office had gone so quiet Nina could hear the vent push out a thin stream of cool air. Late sun lay in a gold bar across the carpet, stopping just short of her shoes. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. It had lost the polite distance he had used all afternoon. I am advising, as of this moment, that the later will not be distributed, he said. Not until a court reviews capacity, coercion, and execution. He turned one page, then the next. Pending that challenge, I will move to preserve the prior instrument as the governing expression of your father's intent. Nina stared at him. She had imagined this sentence a dozen different ways. None of them had sounded so plain. Thaddeus gave a small laugh that broke in the middle. You cannot be serious. Based on a box she found and a dramatic letter? Based on an original will, a contemporaneous letter, the visitor log, and the circumstances around a medicated man signing 6 days before death, the lawyer said. Yes, Mrs. York. I am serious. The use of her married name landed hard. Nina almost missed her own breath. Then it came back in one deep, shaky pull. Her fingers tightened around the folded letter until the paper edges pressed into her palm. She had wanted triumph. Something cleaner than this. A sharp, bright feeling. Instead, relief came in strangely, like weakness after fever. Her knees felt light. Her throat burned. So the house, she said, then hated how quickly she said it. The lawyer looked at her, not unkindly. Under the original will, the house passes to you. The accounts and personal effects are restored to the earlier allocations, pending the court's approval of our petition. Nothing is final today. But your father's prior intent is no longer buried. No longer buried. That did it. Nina pressed the letter to her mouth for 1 second, then lowered it again before anyone could call it a performance. Tears came anyway, hot and embarrassing. She wiped them too fast and shook her head like she was annoyed by them. "I wasn't trying to fight over things," she said. "I mean, I was, but not like she said." The words came out clumsy and defensive. "I just knew he wouldn't do that. Not to me. Not like that." "You do not need to apologize for contesting a suspicious document," the lawyer said. Across the table, Thaddeus sat rigid, chin lifted, eyes bright with fury. "He changed his mind," she said. "People are allowed to change their minds." "They are," the lawyer replied. "They are not allowed to be pushed there." Silence settled again. Softer this time. Final enough to feel. Nina looked down at the crease in the letter and opened it just enough to find the line again. "I needed you to know I didn't forget you." The room blurred, then steadied. She did not smile. There was nothing to celebrate in how late this truth had arrived. But for the first time since her father died, the story in the room matched the man she had loved. The garage door rattled open behind Nina like the house itself was exhaling. She stepped into the wet night with her father's letter folded in her coat pocket and the copy of the restored will sealed in a legal envelope on the passenger seat. Rain had started while they were inside. Not a storm. Just a cold, patient drizzle that silvered the windshield and turned every parking lot light into a blur. She sat in the car for a full minute before starting it. Her hands stayed on the wheel, but her thoughts kept circling back to the same line. "I needed you to know I didn't forget you." She had wanted that sentence for so long that now, with it finally in her possession, she almost resented it. It came too late. It fixed too little. And still it mattered enough to make her throat tighten all over again. The wipers dragged once across the glass. Then again. Nina pulled onto the road and let the yellow lane lines guide her through the dark. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. She glanced down and saw her lawyer's name. For one irrational second, anger flashed through her. Of course. 1 hour of relief was apparently too much to ask. She answered on speaker. "What now?" There was a pause on the other end. Paper shifted. A car passed in the opposite lane, throwing white light across her dashboard. "I'm sorry to call this late," he said. "But I thought you should hear it from me before you hear it from anyone else." Nina gave a short, tired laugh that held no humor. That sentence has never brought good news. "No," he said. "It rarely does." Her grip tightened. "Just say it." Thaddeus York has retained counsel. The name landed like a slap even before the rest came. "They're preparing to challenge the safety deposit box chain," he continued. "Access, custody, timing. And they are claiming your father's letter may have been planted after his death." For a second Nina did not react at all. The road curved. Her turn signal clicked into the silence, absurdly calm. Then the words reached somewhere deeper. "Planted," she said. The word came out too loud. "By who? By me?" "I assume that will be the implication." She barked out a breath and felt heat rise under her skin. "That woman kept me away from him for a week. She rewrote his life in 6 days. And now I'm supposed to sit still while she says I forged the one thing he left me? Nina." His voice stayed level. "I know how this sounds." "No, you know how it is going to sound in court." The correction came fast and ugly. She heard herself and hated the edge of it, but did not take it back. He let it pass. "Yes. I do. Which is why we move carefully now. The original will still changes everything. It wins this round. But this is not finished. Rain ticked harder against the roof. Nina swallowed and looked ahead. Red taillights floated in the distance like warning beacons. What exactly are they saying? She asked, quieter now. That the box was convenient. That the letter is self-serving. That grief makes people imaginative. Their counsel will try to blur your father's intent until it looks uncertain. Nina felt the old shame stir at that. The familiar fear that if she cried, or raised her voice, or remembered one detail wrong, everyone would decide Thaddeus had been right about her all along. But beneath that fear was something steadier now. The letter in her pocket. The visitor logs. The dates. The notary. The house her father had tried to protect. She adjusted both hands on the wheel. The leather creaked under her palms. Her lawyer spoke again. I need to know if you're ready for a longer fight. Nina looked through the rain-dark windshield and saw her own reflection ghosted over the road. Tired eyes. Set jaw. No room left for pleading. She tightened her grip on the wheel. Then let's do this properly, she said. The line went quiet for a beat, as if even he had been waiting to hear whether she meant it. Then he answered, all right. I'll call you first thing. She ended the call, drove on, and did not reach for the letter again. She did not need to. Its weight was there anyway. Some fights do not end when the truth appears. They begin there. And sometimes the cruelest part is learning that being vindicated is not the same thing as being spared. We'll leave Nina on that wet road tonight, with proof in her pocket and a war still opening ahead of her.